Hello, this is Book Circle with Earl Weinberg. This time we will be continuing the collection Galactic Cluster by James Blish, the story Nor Iron Bars. At the end of the last segment, the ship Flyaway 2 had vanished without a sound. And without further explanation, Mommy, 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 mommy. I dream I see him. Johnny, I love you. He's going down the ladder into the pit, and I can't follow, and he's gone already, and it's time for the next act. Spaceship. I'm flying it, and Bobby can see me, and all the people. Some kind of emergency, but then why not the alarms? Got to ring Stauffer. Daddy, Daddy, bye bye, see you, Daddy. Where's the bottle? I knew I shouldn't have gotten sucked into that game. The wind, always the wind. Falling, falling. Why can't I stop falling? Will I die if I stop? 2.834, 2.834. I keep thinking 2.834. That's what the meter says, 2.834. Somebody stop that wind. I tell you it talks. I tell you I hear it. Words in the wind. Johnny, don't go. I'm riding an elephant and he's trying to go down the ladder after you and it's going to break. No alarms. All well. But can't think. Mommy, daddy, starship, bye bye, see you, too windy, daddy, bottle, second straight. What's the bottle, trouble, game, matter, trouble, anyhow? What's the 2.834 physicist? What's his name? Daddy, Johnny, Arp. Will I die if I stop? I love you, wind, mommy, stop. Stop. Arp, where are you? Everyone else, stop thinking. Stop. We're reading each other's minds. Everyone try to stop before we go nuts. Captain Arp, do you hear me? Come to the bridge. Arp, do you hear me? I hear you. I'm on my way. My God. You're there at the field tension meter, 2.834. Yes, you, concentrate. Try not to pay attention to anything else. Yes, sir, 2.834, 2.834. You people with children, try to soothe them, bed them down again. Mr. Hammersmith, the wind. Yes, wake up. We need your help. Osterreicher here. Star deck on the double, please. Hey, Rube. But, right, Mr. Mr. Osterreicher, this way, on the way. As the first officer's powerful personality took hold, the raging storm of emotion and dream subsided gradually to a sort of sullen background sea of fear, marked with fleeting whitecaps of hysteria. And Arp found himself able to think his own thoughts again. There was no doubt about it. Everyone on board the Flyaway 2 had become suddenly and totally telepathic. But what could be the cause? It couldn't be the field. Not only was there nothing in the theory to account for it, but the field had already been effective for nearly an hour at this same intensity without producing any such pandemonium. My conclusion also, Osterreicher said as Arp came into the bridge. Also, you'll notice that we can now see out of the ship and that the outside sensing instruments are registering again. Neither of those things was true up to a few minutes ago. We went blind as soon as the threshold was crossed. Then what's the alternative? Arp said. He found that it helped to speak out loud. It diverted him from the undercurrent of the intimate thoughts of everyone else. It must be characteristic of the space we're in then, wherever that is. Any clue? There's a sun outside, Stauffer said, and it has planets. I'll have the figures for you in a minute. This I can say right away, though. It isn't Alpha Centauri. It's too dim. Somehow Arp hadn't expected it to be. Alpha Centauri was in normal space, and this was obviously anything but normal. He caught the figures as they surfaced in Stauffer's mind. Diameter of primary, about 1,000 miles. Could that possibly be right? Yes, it was correct, but incredible. Number of planets, 6. Diameter of outermost planet, about 1,000 miles. Distance from primary, about 50 million miles. What kind of screwy system is this? Stauffer protested. 6 planets inside 6 astronomical units, and the outside one is as big as the sun? It's dynamically impossible. It certainly was, and yet it was naggingly familiar. Gradually, the truth began to dawn on him. There was only one kind of system in which both primary and planet were consistently 1 to 50,000 of the distance of the outermost orbit. He suppressed it temporarily, partly to see whether or not it was possible to conceal the thought from the others under these circumstances. Check the orbital distances, Mr. Stauffer. There should be only two figures involved. Two, sir, for 6 planets? Yes. You'll find two of the bodies occupying the same distance and the other four at the 50 million mile distance. Great Scott, Osterreicher said. Don't tell me we've gotten ourselves inside an atom, sir. Looks like it. Tell me, Mr. Osterreicher, did you get that from my mind or derive it from what I said? I doped it out, Osterreicher said, puzzled. Good. Now we know something else. It is possible to suppress a thought in this medium. I've been holding the thought carbon atom just below the level of my active consciousness for several minutes. Osterreicher frowned and thought, that's good to know. It increases the possibility of controlling the panic. And slowly, like a sinking ship, the rest of the thought went under. The first officer was practicing. You're right about the planets, sir, Stauffer reported. I suppose this means that they'll all turn out to be the same size and that there'll be no ecliptic either. Necessarily, they're electrons. That sun is the nucleus. But how did it happen? Osterreicher demanded. I can only guess. The field gives us negative mass. We've never encountered negative mass in nature anywhere but in the microcosm. Evidently, that's the only realm where it can exist. Ergo, as soon as we attained negative mass, we were collapsed into the microcosm. Great, Osterreicher grunted. Can we get out, sir? I don't know. Positive mass is allowable in the microcosm, so if we turned off the field, we might just keep right on staying here. We'll have to study it out. What interests me more right now is this telepathy. There must be some rationale for it. He thought about it. Until now, he had never believed in telepathy at all. Its reported behavior in the macrocosm had been so contrary to all known physical laws that it had been easier to assume that it didn't exist. But the laws of the macrocosm didn't apply down here. This was the domain of quantum mechanics, though telepathy didn't obey that scholium either. Was it possible that the parapsychological fields were a part of the fine structure of the universe, as the electromagnetic fields of this universe itself were the fine structure of the macrocosm? If so, any telepathic effects that turned up in the macrocosm would be traces only, a leakage or residuum, fleeting and wayward, beyond all hope of control. Osterreicher, he noticed, was following his reasoning with considerable interest. I'm not used to thinking of electrons as having any fine structure, he said. Well, all the atomic particles have spin, and to measure that, you have to have some kind of point on the particle being translated from one position in space to another, at least by analogy. I would say that the analogy is established now. All we have to do is look out the port. You mean we might land on one of those things, sir? Stauffer asked. I should think so, Arp said, if we think there's something to be gained by it. I'll leave that up to Mr. Osterreicher. Why not? Osterreicher said, adding to Arp's surprise, research chance alone oughtn't to be passed up. Suddenly, the background fear, which Arp had more and more become able to ignore, began to swell ominously. Huge combers of pure panic were beginning to race over it. Oof, Osterreicher said. We weren't covering enough. We forgot that they could pick up every unguarded word we said, and they don't like the idea. They didn't. Individual thoughts were hard to catch, but the main tenor was plain. These people had signed up to go to Centaurus, and that was where they wanted to go. The good possibility that they were trapped on the atomic size level was terrifying enough, but taking the further risk of landing on an electron. Abruptly, Arp felt, almost without any words to go with it, the raw strength of Hammersmith's throwing himself Canute-like against the tide. The explorer's mind had not been in evidence at all since the first shock. Evidently, he had quickly discovered for himself the trick of masking. For a moment, the sheer militancy of Hammersmith's counterstroke seemed to have a calming effect. One thread of pure terror lifted above the mass. It was Celia Gaspardi. She had just awakened, and her shell of bravado had been stripped completely. Following that high, soundless stream, the combers of panic became higher still, more rapid. We'll have to do something about that woman, Osterreicher said tensely. Arp noted with interest that he was masking the thought he was speaking, quite a difficult technical trick. He tried to mask it also in the reception. She's going to throw the whole ship into an uproar. You were talking to her at some length last night, sir. Perhaps you should try. All right, Arp said reluctantly, taking a step toward the door. I gather she's still in her. Celia Gaspardi was in her stateroom. So was Captain Arp. She stifled a small vocal scream as she recognized him. Don't be alarmed, he said quickly, though he was almost as alarmed as she was. Listen, Mr. Osterreicher and everybody else, be careful about making any sudden movements with some definite destination in mind. You are likely to arrive there without crossing the intervening distance. It's a characteristic of the space we're in. I read you, sir. So teleportation is an energy level jump? That could be nasty, all right. It's nice of you to try to quiet me, the girl said timidly. Arp noticed covertly that she could not mask worth a damn. He would have to be careful in what he said, for she would effectively make every word known throughout the ship. It was too bad, in a way. Attractive as she was in her public role, she was downright beautiful when frightened. Please try to keep a hold on yourself, Miss Gaspardi, he said. There really doesn't seem to be any immediate danger. The ship is sound and her mechanisms are all operating as they should. We have supplies for a full year and unlimited power. We ought to be able to get away. There's nothing to be frightened about. I can't help it, she said desperately. I can't even think straight. My thoughts keep getting mixed up with everybody else's. We're all having that trouble to some extent, Arp said. If you concentrate, you'll find you can filter the other thoughts out at about 90%. And you'll have to try, because if you remain frightened, you'll panic other people, especially the children. They're defenseless against adult emotions even without telepathy. I'll, I'll try. Good for you. With a slight smile, he added, after all, if you think as little of your fifth husband as you say, you should welcome a little delay en route. It was entirely the wrong thing to say. At once, way down at the bottom of her mind, a voice cried out in soundless anguish, But I love him. Tears were running down her cheeks. Helplessly, Arp left. He walked carefully, in no hurry to repeat the unnerving teleportation jump. In the main companionway, he was waylaid by a junior officer almost at once. Excuse me, sir, I have to report here from the ship's surgeon. Dr. Hoyle said it might be urgent, and it's better if I bring it to you personally. Oh, all right. What is it? Dr. Hoyle's compliments, sir, and he suggests that oxygen tension be checked. He has an acute surgical emergency, a passenger, which suggests we may be running close to 9,000. Arp tried to think about this, but it did not convey very much to him, and what it did convey was confusing. He knew that spaceships, following a tradition laid down long ago in atmospheric flight, customarily expressed oxygen tension in terms of feet of altitude on Earth. But 9,000 feet, though it would doubtless cause some discomfort, did not seem to represent a dangerously low concentration. And he could see no connection at all between a slightly depleted oxygen level and an acute surgical emergency. Besides, he was too flustered over Celia Gaspardi. The interview had not ended at all the way he had hoped, but perhaps it was better to have left her grief stricken than panic stricken. Of course, if she broadcast her grief all over the ship, there were plenty of other people to receive it, people who had causes for grief as real as hers. Grief inactivates, Osterreicher said as Arp re entered the bridge. Even at its worst, it doesn't create riots. Cheer up, sir. I couldn't have done any better, I'm sure of that. Thank you, Mr. Osterreicher, Arp said, flushing. Evidently, he had forgotten to mask. Thinking out loud was more than a cliche down here. To cover, he proffered Hoyle's confusing message. Oh, Osterreicher strode to the mixing board and scanned the big bourbon gauges with a single sweeping glance. He's right. We're pushing 8,700 right now. Once we cross 10,000, we'll have to order everybody into masks. I thought I was feeling a little lightheaded. Mr. Stauffer, order an increase in pressure and get the bubble crew going on the double. Right, Stauffer shot out. Mr. Osterreicher, what's this all about? We've sprung a major leak, sir, or more likely, quite a few major leaks. We've got to find out where all this air is going. We may have killed Hoyle's patient already. Arp groaned. Surprisingly, Osterreicher grinned. Everything leaks, he said in a conversational tone. That's the first law of space. On the Mars run, when we disliked a captain, we used to wish him an interesting trip. This one is interesting. You're a psychologist, Mr. Osterreicher, Arp said, but he managed to grin back. Very well, what's the problem now? I feel some weight. We're making a rocket approach to the nearest electron, sir, and we seem to be moving. I see no reason why we should suspend that. Evidently, the third law of motion isn't invalid down here. Which is a break, Stauffer said gloomily from the door. I've got the bubble crew moving, Mr. Osterreicher, but it still take a while. Captain, what are we seeing by? Gamma rays? Space itself doesn't seem to be dark here. Gamma rays are too long, said Arp. Probably de Broglie waves. The illuminated sky is probably a demonstration of Obler's paradox. It's how our space would look if the stars were evenly scattered throughout. That makes me think we must be inside a fairly large body of matter, and the nearest one was SV1. Oh ho, said Stauffer. And what happens to us when a cosmic ray primary comes charging through here and disrupts our atom? Arp smiled. You've got the answer to that already. Have you detected any motion in this electron we're approaching? Not much, just normal planetary motion, about 14 miles a second, expectable for the orbit, which wouldn't be expectable at all unless we were living on an enormously accelerated time scale. By our home time scale, we haven't been here a billionth of a second yet. We could spend the rest of our lives here without seeing a free neutron or a cosmic primary. That's a relief, Stauffer said, but he sounded a little dubious. They fell silent as the little world grew gradually in the ports. There was no visible surface detail on it, and the albedo was high. As they came closer, the reasons for both effects became evident, for with each passing moment, the outlines of the body grew fuzzier. It seemed to be embedded in a sort of thick haze. Close enough, Osterreicher ruled. We can't land the far away anyhow. We'll have to put a couple of people off in a tender. Any suggestions, sir? I'm going, Arp said immediately. I wouldn't miss an opportunity like this for everything. Can't blame you, sir, Osterreicher said. But that body doesn't look like it has any solid core. What if you just sank right through to the center? That's not likely, Arp said. I've got a small increment of negative mass, and I'll retain it by picking up the ship's field with an antenna. The electron's light, but what mass it has is positive. In other words, it will repel me slightly. I won't sink far. Well, then, who's to go with you? Osterreicher said, masking every word with great care. One trained observer should be enough, but you'll need an anchor man. I'm astonished that we haven't heard from Hammersmith already. Have you noticed how tightly he shut down as soon as this subject came up? So he did, Arp said, baffled. I haven't heard a peep out of him for the last hour. Well, that's his problem. Maybe he had enough after Titan. How about Miss Gaspardi? Stauffer suggested. It seems to reassure her to be with you, Captain, and it'll give her something new to think about. And it'll take an incipient panic center off the ship, enough to let the others people calm down. Good enough, Arp said. Mr. Stauffer, order the gig broken out. The little world had a solid surface after all, although it blended so gradually into the glittering haze of its atmosphere that it was very hard to see. Arp and the girls seemed to be walking waist deep in some swirling opalescent substance that was bearing a colloidal metallic dust like minute sequins. The faint repulsions against their spacesuits could not be felt as such. It seemed instead that they were walking in a gravitational field about a tenth that of Earth. It's terribly quiet, Celia said. The suit radios, Arp noticed, were not working. Luckily, the thought-carrying properties of the medium around them were unchanged. I'm not at all sure that this stuff would carry sound, he answered. It isn't a gas as we know it, anyhow. It's simply a manifestation of indefiniteness. The electron never knows exactly where it is. It just trails off at its boundaries into not being anywhere in particular. Well, it's eerie. How long do we have to stay here? Not long. I just want to get some idea of what it's like. He bent over. The surface, he saw, was covered with fine detail, though again he was unable to make much sense of it. Here and there, he saw tiny crooked rills of some brilliantly shiny substance, rather like mercury, and Yes, there was an irregular puddle of it, and it showed a definite meniscus. When he pushed his finger into it, the puddle dented deeply, but it did not break and wet his glove. Its surface tension must be enormous. He wondered if it were made entirely of identical subfundamental particles. The whole globe seemed to be covered by a network of these shiny threads. Now that his eyes were becoming acclimated, he saw that the air, too, was full of these shining veins, making it look distinctly marbled. The veins offered no impediment to their walking. Somehow, they never seemed to be any in their immediate vicinity, though there were always many of them just ahead. As the two moved, their progress seemed to be accompanied by vagrant, small emotional currents without visible cause or source, too furtive to identify. What's all that silvery stuff? Celia demanded fearfully. Celia, I haven't the faintest idea. What kind of particle could possibly be submicroscopic to an electron? It'd take a century of research right here on the spot to work up even an educated guess. This is all strange and new, utterly outside any experience man has ever had. I doubt that any words exist to describe it accurately. The ground, too, seemed to vary in color. In the weak light, it was hard to tell what the colors were. The variations appeared as shades of gray with a bluish or greenish tinge here and there. The emotional waves became a little stronger, and suddenly Arp recognized the dominant one. It was pain. On a hunch, he turned suddenly and looked behind him. A twin set of broad black boot prints, as solid and sharply defined as if they had been painted, were marked out on the colored patches. I don't like the look of that, he said. Our ship itself is almost a planetary mass in this system, and we're far too big for this planet. How do we know what all this fine detail means? But we're destroying it wherever we step, all the same. Forests, cities, the cells of some organism, something unguessable. But we've got to go back right now. Believe me, I'm willing, the girl said. The oldest footprints, those that they had made getting out of the tender, were beginning to grow silvery at the edges, as though with hoarfrost, or with whatever fungus might attack a shadow. Or was it seepage of the same substance that made up the rills? Conjecture multiplied endlessly without answer here. Arp hated to think of the long oval blot the tender itself would leave behind on the landscape. He could only hope the damage would be self-repairing. There was something about this place that was peculiarly organic. He lifted the tender quickly and took it out of the opalescent atmosphere with a minimum of ceremony, casting ahead for guidance to pick up the multifarious murmur of minds on board the Flyaway 2. Only when he noticed that he was searching the sky visually for the ship did he realize he was not getting anything. Celia, can you hear me all right telepathically? Clear as a bell. It makes me feel much better, Captain. Then what's wrong with the ship? I don't pick up a soul. She frowned. Why, neither do I. Where? Art pointed ahead. There she is, right where we left her. We could hear them all well enough at this distance when we were on the way down. Why can't we now? He gunned the tender, all caution forgotten. His arrival in the Flyaway Two's airlock was noisy, and he lost several minutes jockeying the little boat into proper seal. They both fell out of it in an inelegant scramble. There was nobody aboard the Flyaway Two. Nobody but themselves. The telepathic silence left no doubt in Arp's or Celia's mind, but they searched the huge vessel thoroughly to make sure. It was deserted. Captain, Celia cried. Her panic was coming back full force. What happened? Where could they have gone? There isn't any place. I know there isn't. I don't know. Calm down a minute, Celia, and let me think. He sat down on a stanchion and stared blindly at the hull for a moment. Breathing the thinning air was a labor in itself. He found himself wishing they had not shucked their suits. Finally, he got up and went back to the bridge with the girl clinging desperately to his elbow. Everything was in order. It was as if the whole ship had been deserted simultaneously in an instant. Osterreicher's pipe sat snugly in its clip by the chartboard, though it was empty of any trace of the self-oxygenating mixture Osterreicher's juniors had dubbed old gunpowder. The bowl was still hot. It can't have happened more than half an hour ago, he whispered, as if they all did a jump at once, like the one that put me into your stateroom. But where to? Suddenly it dawned on him. There was only one answer. Of course, they had gone nowhere. What is it? Celia cried. I can see what you're thinking, but it doesn't make sense. It makes perfect sense in this universe, he said grimly. Celia, we're going to have to work fast before Osterreicher makes some stab in the dark that might be irrevocable. Luckily, everything's running as though the crew were still here to tend it, which in fact happens to be true. So maybe two of us will be enough to do what we have to do, but we're going to have to follow instructions fast, accurately, and without stopping for an instant to ask questions. What are you going to do? Shut down the field. No, don't protest. You haven't the faintest idea what that means, so you've no grounds for protest. Sit down at that board over there and watch my mind every instant. The moment I think of what you're to do next, do it. Understand? No, but you understand well enough. All right, let's go. Rapidly, he began to step down the Nernst current going into the field generators, mentally directing Celia in the delicate job of holding the fusion sphere steady against the diminishing drain. Within a minute, he had the field down to just above the threshold level. The servos functioned without a hitch, and so, not very much to his surprise, did those aspects of the task which were supposed to be manned at all times. All right, now I'm going to cut it entirely. There'll be a big backlash on your board. See that master meter right in front of you at the head of the board? The black knob marked back EMF is cued to it. When I pull this switch, the meter will kick over to some reading above the red line. At the same instant, you roll the knob down to exactly the same calibration. If you back it down too far, the Nernst will die and will have no power at all. If you don't go down far enough, the Nernst will detonate. You've got to catch it on the nose. Understand? I I think so. Good, he said. He hoped it would be good. And we'll find out if it's good or not next time.